Why are right-wingers in America beefing over an attack on a U.S. warship that happened nearly 60 years ago? One word: Israel. For decades, the story of what happened to the USS Liberty has been a historical footnote. But in the wake of Israel's war on Gaza and the subsequent genocide, it's suddenly a hot topic and a source of real division for conservatives. Last autumn, prominent commentator and podcaster Ben Shapiro, a staunch defender of Israel, took a question at Turning Point USA conference America Fest. The exchange went viral.
Why, therefore, did you call irrelevant the Israeli attack in 1967 on the USS Liberty, which left dozens of American servicemen dead and hundreds wounded?
And we can spend the rest of the time talking about the specifics of the U.S. Liberty attack, or you can actually go look at the naval investigations that were done, multiple naval investigations that were done. The reality is that people were flying Mirage planes for the Israeli military at the time. The USS Liberty was sailing in an area where it had essentially gone off-grid. The Israeli military mistook it for an Egyptian ship. They thought it was shelling Al Arish, which happened not to be true. In the initial attack, the American flag was knocked down, and then the attack went on for about 90 minutes. And then as soon, you can hear this, by the way, on the tapes of the Israeli pilots talking to each other, as soon as they realize that it's an American ship, they call off the attack.
This narrative is so ingrained that for years, even raising the subject was considered a sign that someone is a conspiracy theorist or anti-Semitic or both. Here's conservative commentator Rich Lowry.
Pay attention, everyone. We have a new conspiracy theory, or at least an old conspiracy theory that's getting new attention.
That's definitely the direction Ben Shapiro took things during that exchange at America Fest.
But you're not answering my question, which is, what is your broader agenda in asking the question? Because I suspect that your question is not limited to your specific ire over an incident that happened in 1967.
Then, later in the conference, another right-wing commentator, Tucker Carlson, came to the questioner's defense.
That's not the right way. Don't attack people's motives. It's totally fine to ask about why a foreign government tried to sink one of our ships in 1967. That doesn't make you an anti-Semite, sorry.
The fact is that for Israel and for the Jews, when it comes to the environment now that's been created by some right-wing influencers, the truth is not good enough, and the truth is not a defense.
The debate hasn't stayed confined to podcasts and conservative media. On June 8th, the 59th anniversary of the attack, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie took to the floor of the House of Representatives to honor the crew of the USS Liberty.
It's my great honor, maybe one of the biggest honors of my lifetime, to stand here on the floor and do something that's 59 years overdue, to recognize the survivors and those who gave their lives on the USS Liberty.
But Massie wasn't just paying tribute. He was also challenging the official explanation for what happened.
The official reports say that it was a case of mistaken identity. None of these distinguished men think this was an accident.
So what is the truth? Who should we believe? Well, how about we start with the highest-ranking military official ever to investigate the matter, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moorer. On the 30th anniversary of the attack in 1997, he wrote a searingly critical memorandum, the contents of which have been virtually ignored by the mainstream media.
I have never believed that the attack on the USS Liberty was a case of mistaken identity. Israel knew perfectly well that the ship was American.
In 2003, an unofficial panel of retired military officers chaired by Moorer, it's known as the Moorer Commission, they wrote a report echoing these sentiments, and they challenged the official Israeli and U.S. government position. But even Moorer is not saying he knows the truth. He's saying he never believed that the attack on the USS Liberty was a case of mistaken identity. So, with that in mind, let's flip the script. Let's lay out exactly what happened that day, June 8th, 1967, and see what it would take to believe otherwise, that Admiral Moorer is wrong, that Ben Shapiro is right, and that this was all one big misunderstanding. First, the context. This happened on day 4 of what's known as the Six-Day War. Israel launched a devastating preemptive attack on 3 of its Arab neighbors, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. By June 8th, the day the Liberty was attacked, Israel had already achieved a historic victory, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. Egypt and Syria were reeling, and Israel was keen to press its advantage. So, this is the situation into which the USS Liberty, the Navy's premier intelligence-gathering ship, arrived in international waters off the coast of Egypt. That day, it had 294 people on board, officers and crew. At 3 in the morning, it arrives at its designated station, about 14 to 15 nautical miles off the Israeli-occupied city of El Arish in the Sinai Peninsula. According to Ben Shapiro, it had gone dark.
At the time, the USS Liberty was sailing in an area where it had essentially gone off-grid. The Israeli military mistook it for an Egyptian ship.
But that's probably not true. The survivors tell a different story.
I was listening to the chatter the night before. They knew it was an American ship that came into the area. They knew who we were.
As soon as the sun came up, an Israeli photo reconnaissance plane arrived on the scene. It was the first of 8 flybys throughout that morning. 8 flybys.
They were slowly lumbering over our ship, and we were waving at them, they were waving at us. And I felt that we were in great shape because they knew who we were.
In the first of a series of basic operational errors committed that day by a military, by the way, that had just shocked the world with its precision and its capability, the Israelis claimed the Liberty's position was accidentally removed from the naval combat map during a shift change at naval headquarters. According to the Israeli official account, by 11 a.m., despite an entire morning of recon flights, all knowledge of the Liberty's presence in the area was accidentally erased from its operational map. So, it's around this point that Israel received reports of an explosion in the city of El Arish. Now, in reality, the explosion was caused by retreating Egyptian forces destroying an ammunition dump. But Israel assumed the city was being shelled from the sea by the Egyptians. So the Israelis start casting about, looking for who's shelling El Arish. And because of the shift change mix-up, on their maps, there were no foreign ships in the field of operation. What follows is an account of another pretty major error. They send 3 IR-class torpedo boats to investigate, and their radar quickly spots the Liberty. It was just sitting out there. But here's where it gets interesting. According to Israeli accounts, not one but 2 boats, both independently misjudged the USS Liberty's speed at 30 knots. 30 knots is really fast for a ship that size, suspiciously fast, in fact. That's because, according to Israeli procedure, when there are reports of an enemy in the theater and the radar detects 1 or more ships sailing at a speed of above 20 knots, it shall be considered hostile and no further identification should be carried out. Translation, it triggers a shoot first, ask questions later situation. But here's the problem. The USS Liberty's top speed was 17.5 knots. That's top speed. In reality, it was basically crawling along at only 5 knots. But due to that erroneous information, 2 Israeli Mirage 3 jets are hastily diverted to the theater of operations. They could have shot on sight, but they didn't. Instead, they assessed the situation, assessed the scene. The pilots descended to 3,000 feet, that's pretty low, and circled the ship 2 times. Despite the shift change screw-up and the radar screw-up, things could have easily ended there. And frankly, it's hard to understand why they didn't. Because there are a number of reasons why this should have never been mistaken for an Egyptian ship. First and foremost, at 10,000 tons, the Liberty was at least 5 times as large as the Egyptian ship they claimed to be chasing, the El Qasser. So that's one reason the Liberty was much larger. But according to former Joint Chief of Staff Admiral Thomas H. Moorer, there was another reason. The Liberty was also much stranger.
I have flown over the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans for thousands of hours, searching for ships and identifying all types of ships at sea. The Liberty was the ugliest, strangest-looking ship in the U.S. Navy. As a communications intelligence ship, it was sprouting every kind of antenna. It looked like a lobster with all those projections moving every which way. Israel knew perfectly well that the ship was American.
So, Say you give them every benefit of the doubt. Say you can excuse not spotting the difference in size, or mistaking the most sophisticated intelligence ship in the US Navy for a rundown Egyptian cargo ship, or even the fact that the Liberty had markings in the Latin alphabet rather than Arabic. You could maybe have excused all of that had it not been for the flag. The Israeli pilots later testified that they couldn't see the flag, that it was hanging limply in calm conditions. But this was contradicted by both the weather logs and testimony from the crew, who say the flag that they were flying that day was enormous and impossible to miss. Here's research officer Lloyd Painter from a 2014 Al Jazeera documentary.
We had an American flag flying the standard, and then we put up the holiday colors, which is a huge American flag. And it was a bright sunny day with the wind blowing, 5 or 10 knots, the flag was unfurled. You could see it for miles.
Despite it all, the jets are ordered to attack. At 2 p.m., jets target the bridge of the ship with cannon fire. In the initial wave, the Israelis strafed the Liberty 4 times with 30mm cannons and with rockets, killing 8 crew members and injuring 75 more. The ship tried unsuccessfully to radio for help.
They were jamming both our distress frequencies and our tactical frequencies.
Jamming distress frequencies is bad enough. It's a violation of international law. But it's the jamming of these tactical frequencies that further challenges the narrative that this was a case of mistaken identity. Here's Jim Kavanaugh. He was a communications technician on the USS Liberty and was speaking to that Al Jazeera documentary crew.
We could not get a signal across. Here's the question I have to ask. Who would know the frequencies other than an ally? And who was the ally in the war? It wasn't Egypt. It was Israel. They would know, and only they would know in this conflict, what our frequencies would be.
As members of the crew lay dead and dying on the deck, 2 more jets are preparing a bombing run. They hit the ship with napalm, which engulfed the deck in a deadly fire. At 2:11 p.m., the Israeli jets were running low on ammo and retreated. So for 13 minutes, there's this sense of uneasy calm. Amazingly, despite everything the crew of the Liberty had already been through, the worst was still to come. At 2:24 p.m., 3 torpedo boats arrived on the scene. They were reportedly ordered to hold fire, but their commander, Moshe Oren, later claimed he never received the order. Meanwhile, the Liberty is in terrible shape. The napalm had started a huge fire and smoke was everywhere, and suddenly the ship's stores of .50 caliber bullets started exploding. Reportedly mistaking it for incoming fire, Commander Oren launches 5 torpedoes. 4 of them missed their mark, but 1 was a direct hit, blowing a hole in the starboard side of the Liberty. It nearly sunk the ship, and it killed 25 American servicemen instantly. On board, there was a mad scramble to save the ship and to get the wounded to safety. Here's research officer Lloyd Painter once more.
I went up and looked out myself before I tried to get anyone up, and that's when I observed a motor torpedo boat, Israeli, plainly marked with the Star of David, machine gunning our life rafts.
In his 1997 memorandum, Admiral Moorer took special exception to the torpedo boats targeting the wounded.
It is telling, with respect to whether total annihilation was the intent, that the Liberty crew has reported that the torpedo boat's machine guns also were turned on life rafts that were deployed into the Mediterranean, as well as those few on deck that had escaped damage.
This is a pretty sensitive subject for Navy guys like Admiral Moorer. I mean, for one, it's a war crime. The Geneva Convention explicitly criminalizes killing combatants who have surrendered or no longer have means of defense. That includes life raft occupants. In fact, a World War II U-boat commander was successfully prosecuted for machine gunning life raft survivors. According to the official Israeli account, Commander Oren eventually was able to ID the Liberty using its hull classification symbol, and he called off his boats. But the survivors of the Liberty claim the attack was called off for a different reason. They recount that a radio man finally managed to rig a whip antenna and get a distress signal out.
He got out a mayday. Firefox, this is Rock Star. Under attack by unidentified surface and naval air units, require immediate assistance.
The Sixth Fleet, which is 500 miles away, heard the cry for help and the Israelis knew they heard it, that's when they finally called things off. Regardless, Israeli helicopters were flown in and they reported seeing the US flag flying from the ship's mast. The helicopter offered support, but the Americans refused, and the Liberty limped, scorched, and shot up into the port of Malta 6 days later. Captain William McGonigal, who was injured in the attack, was weak and lost a lot of blood, but he never relinquished command. The final casualty count was 34 American deaths and 171 wounded. Now, in the wake of the attack, the outrage from the Johnson administration was initially quite fierce, but that soon died down for reasons that have been the subject of controversy ever since. A court of inquiry report was rushed out in just 20 days. No Israelis were interviewed, there's no mention of napalm, no blame was assigned. There's also no mention of methodically gunning down lifeboats. Lloyd Painter later charged that his testimony was purposely omitted. The conclusion of the court of inquiry was that it was a tragic mishap. The CIA ended up backing that up. Analysis from June 1967 said the attack was not made in malice towards the US, but constituted gross negligence. Israel's investigation called it a tragic error, but found no negligence warranting courts-martial. However, even at the time, there were well-placed people in the US government that felt entirely differently. According to declassified CIA reports from June 1967, sources in Tel Aviv reported Israel's forces knew exactly what flag the Liberty was flying. Another CIA report from October 1967 said that Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan personally ordered the attack on the USS Liberty over the objection of senior uniformed military personnel, one of whom characterized the attack as, quote, pure murder. Now, to be fair, this is quoting unnamed human intelligence sources in Tel Aviv, and the memo is heavily redacted because portions remain classified to this day. So there's a lot we don't know, but it's still pretty devastating. Especially when you consider that former Secretary of State Dean Rusk also placed blame on Defense Minister Dayan, saying in an interview a decade later that the attack was not an accident, but deliberate.
I was never satisfied with the Israeli explanation. The attack was outrageous. I don't believe them then, and I don't believe them to this day.
Rusk believed that Dayan ordered the Liberty to be sunk to hide evidence of his intention to seize Syria's Golan Heights, which he was intending to do without consulting Prime Minister Levi Eshkol and other key Israeli officials. And here's the biggest piece of evidence for those who believe this was a cover-up. In 2002, Captain Ward Boston Jr., who was one of only two authors of that 1967 Court of Inquiry report that initially exonerated the Israelis of responsibility, he testified that transcripts of the Court of Inquiry were altered at the instructions of the Johnson administration. Under oath, he said testimony damaging to the Israelis was deleted and changed. This was Boston's final assessment.
I am certain that the Israeli pilots that undertook the attack, as well as their superiors who had ordered the attack, were well aware that the ship was American.
These are the words of the co-author of the very report that Ben Shapiro hangs his hat on.
Looking at an attack that happened mistakenly by multiple Navy reports, multiple Israeli reports, and all available evidence.
All available evidence? And that's what galls Admiral Moore most of all, actually. It's the lack of a proper investigation.
Congress to this day has failed to hold formal hearings for the record on the Liberty affair. This is unprecedented and a national disgrace.
If all available evidence supports the narrative that this was the case of mistaken identity, then put it out there. But anything less, says Admiral Moore, is an insult to the crew of the Liberty and their fallen seamen.
The captain and crew of the Liberty, rather than being widely acclaimed as the heroes they most certainly are, have been silenced, ignored, honored belatedly and away from the cameras, and denied a history that accurately reflects their ordeal.
Admiral Moore wrote those words in 1997. Nearly 3 decades later, many of the men who survived the attack are still waiting for what they believe is a full accounting of what happened that day. On June 8th, 2026, Congressman Thomas Massie stood on the floor of the House of Representatives and called for Congress to revisit the case.
While they're still alive, they need closure. Let's give them closure. Let's have an investigation. Let's pass a resolution honoring them. It's long overdue.